So here we go. Bill Cassidy on the fate of Todd Blanche as the Attorney General.
Like the President, you do. I have not approached it that way. This process should be about Mr. Blanche and how he will go forward in a difficult job and how the American people can be best served. I have a history with Mr. Trump, but that history does not matter one bit. On the one hand, Mr. Blanche does not need to be Senate confirmed. He can continue to serve at the pleasure of the President as Deputy Attorney General or even Acting Attorney General if this vote is pulled. On the other hand, I am told that Senate confirmation is important in interactions with the President, with others in the Cabinet, and is important to DOJ employees in general. Being Senate confirmed gives him greater leverage to push for things that should be pushed for. This does not demean the Senate's role. Important issues have been discussed through this process, and Mr. Blanche has made commitments. Now on to the specific nomination. Since Mr. Blanche passed out of Judiciary Committee on August the 4th, I've spoken to Mr. Blanche 5 or 6 times. We have texted many more. I just got off the phone with him. I've spoken multiple times to Senators Murkowski, Cornyn, Tillis. Senator Whitehouse shared his concerns. Additionally, I spoke with current and past administration officials, including a long conversation with former Attorney General Bill Barr. Late last night, I spoke to 2 U.S. attorneys from Louisiana, David Corsell and Kurt Wall. Of course, there's been a lot to read and a lot to consider, and I slept on it overnight. Let's start with the concerns. Mr. Blanche showed poor judgment in approving the anti-weaponization slush fund and exempting the President from IRS audits. No American should be unfairly targeted by the law, but no American should be above the law. Mr. Blanche said these were mistakes, and he has made efforts to kill the slush fund. I am particularly concerned about episodes of apparent lawfare. DOJ bringing suits against political enemies. Both parties, presidents of both parties, have been guilty of this. It must stop. It should stop now. A never-ending cycle of prosecuting political enemies undermines the rule of law, degrades the public's trust in our institutions, and makes our politics more extreme when we need to unite to solve the big problems of our time. I'm not entirely satisfied where this is, and I have no doubts that I'll have concern in the future. I will note that I've learned that some of the cases that have been publicly reported to be under investigation by the Department of Justice have been dismissed or are no longer being pursued. I am realistic that President Trump can be unrelenting on this, but this will be true no matter who the Attorney General is, and this is the rationale for having a Senate-confirmed Attorney General with more leverage to push back. I will also note that Mr. Blanche is criticized for things over which he has no control. He points out that he has been criticized for presidential pardons given to January 6 rioters, some of whom assaulted police officers. Many of us were here then. But this is a presidential prerogative, and he is not the president. He also points out that he can advise the president, but the president is not obligated to take his advice. That is the same thing that former Attorney General Barr said in a separate conversation. And Mr. President, I can absolutely believe that President Trump at times would not take advice. But even critics admit that Mr. Blanche knows the law and is a hands-on administrator. He has instructed U.S. attorneys to focus on violent crime, human and drug trafficking, and fraud in programs like Medicare and Medicaid. Mr. Corsell, the U.S. Attorney in New Orleans, says that when he needed extra resources, Acting Attorney General Blanche provided them to finish a big drug case. Both Mr. Corsell and Mr. Wall said that DOJ has accountability measures for each prosecutor in their office, and that there are weekly calls between their offices and DOJ to review the performance of each prosecutor. That morale was high, not despite the accountability measures, but because of the accountability measures. More cases were being processed and convictions being obtained. David Corsell spoke of almost $1 billion in fraud being recovered for the U.S. taxpayer from health care fraud. Both men said that having a permanent Senate-confirmed Attorney General was important. I cannot overstate Mr. Wall's and Mr. Corsell's support for Mr. Blanche. When former Attorney General Bill Barr endorsed Mr. Blanche, he said Mr. Blanche will run the department as effectively as anyone can under President Trump. Some have called that faint praise. I don't think that it is. I think it is a reality. Barr specifically addressed the allegation that Mr. Blanche would be a yes man for the president. He said that any attorney to represent a client well has to have tough conversations and confront a client with difficult truths. That because of his previous attorney-client relationship with President Trump, Mr. Blanche would be precisely the person to push back on President Trump. But that ultimately, and here Barr echoed what I heard from Blanche. Decisions are made by the president. Mr. Blanche is not perfect, and he will tell you this, but the choice is not between perfection and Mr. Blanche. It is between Mr. Blanche and another acting attorney general who may not run the department effectively under President Trump and who indeed may not be as good as Mr. Blanche. This puts at risk the progress made fighting violent crime, human and drug trafficking, and fraud. And this does not serve the American people well. This is not a referendum on President Trump. It is a decision regarding Mr. Blanche in very specific circumstances. All considered, I will vote for Mr. Blanche. I'll be criticized for this vote. What's new? But the people of Louisiana can be assured that I worked hard to understand the issue and to make the right decision. With that, I yield.
President.
Senator from Oregon.
Mr. President, I fully support taking tougher action.
Okay, well, the buildup was different from the decision. I think we can say that. He mentioned all the issues, the IRS audits, the weaponization fund, the DOJ bringing this never-ending cycle of political targets and going after your enemies, both presidents on Republican and Democratic side. But this nomination appears to still be above water.
And if you saw there along with us, he got very emotional at the end there. Seemed to be like he took a pause and maybe had some tears in his eyes. Let's get out to Chad Pergram. He's our chief congressional correspondent. Chad, what did you take away from that?
Well, this probably means that Todd Blanche is going to be confirmed, maybe even later today, as the next Attorney General. As I always say, it's about the math. Once we learned here that Susan Collins a couple of days ago was a no and Lisa Murkowski was a no, it was down to one more Republican senator. Now, Mitch McConnell, the former Senate Majority Leader, he appears back in Washington right now, but he is not voting. And so, it's up to Bill Cassidy. He was the one person who, as he indicated in his floor speech, had been having these conversations, including just before this floor speech this morning with Todd Blanche, and indicated today in that emotional speech that he will vote yes. So by my calculation here, if there's no Democrats who change here and there's no Republicans who change their position, the vote, when they have it, should be 50 to 49, with Mitch McConnell being out, with all Democrats, 2 Republicans voting no, Collins and Murkowski. When might they do this? Well, they were supposed to have a procedural vote on that this morning. They haven't done that yet, but they could do this afternoon. And what we're seeing today overall in the Senate, as I said in my earlier report, is that they're really stepping on the gas on this slate of issues that they're trying to get wrapped up here: funding the government, Russia sanctions, and confirming Todd Blanche, maybe a couple of other things, but those were the big 3, the hat trick of what they had to deal with there. And so maybe they would have, if they have that procedural vote, say later this afternoon, by the book, and you burn the 30 hours that's entailed after that, then they wouldn't actually have the procedural vote, the final confirmation vote, until tomorrow night. But as I say here on Capitol Hill this time of year, last day of session, probably before the summer recess, people want to get out of here. And there's just a soupçon of jet fumes permeating the Capitol building from an air duct somewhere that people want to get to the airport and get home. And so they will probably speed that up, let both sides have their say, and maybe confirm him late this afternoon or this evening, if I had to guess.
Okay, all right, Chad, stand by, okay? I want to bring in Carrie and Shannon to our coverage here. But a hot August morning, I guess we could say. Yeah. Carrie, John Thune told us yesterday when we asked him about Todd Blanche's nomination, that he's in the queue. And we thought, well, that's not the most favorable response, but apparently last evening he told reporters he will get a vote, so he knew something. Carrie, let's start with you. Go.
Yeah, I thought that Senator Cassidy's speech was excellent. It was clear that he spent a lot of time talking to people who are in the know, whether it was Todd Blanche himself or others around him, people who previously served as Attorney General, his colleagues, and others, and he came to a decision very thoughtfully. One of the points he hit that I thought was especially compelling was that Todd Blanche's previous relationship with President Trump. Now, Now, Blanche's critics and certain people in the media have said that's a bad thing. Well, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing, because if anyone can reason and have a frank conversation and candid conversation with President Trump, it's going to be someone that he trusts and he's worked with in the past, who was with him in the trenches. And as someone who was part of the coverage of those disgraceful trials in New York against Trump and watched Todd Blanche in action, they were out in a limb. They were by themselves for quite a while. And so I thought that was a very good point. Given we know that President Trump is not the easiest client for any attorney general. So I think that previous relationship helps Blanche. And I think that was a thoughtful point in his favor. The other thing I would just say on that is Senator Cassidy is right. Having worked for Attorney General Bill Barr, it is President Trump who ultimately makes the final decision. Right. And that's true for anyone who's going to serve as his AG. So again, I think this speech from Senator Kennedy was thoughtful, was good, and I really appreciated his point about ending this encouragement to end this prosecution of political enemies. I would say to President Trump, if I were advising him, look, they started it. The James Comey, the Letitia James, the Adam Schiffs, they 100% started this abuse of the Justice Department, certainly against you, but you can end it. And if you're interested in preserving a great legacy for your time here as president, I think that would be, I don't know there's anything better that he could do or that you could do.
Yeah, Shannon, I thought the biggest moment there was when he got very emotional near the end. You could tell that it really weighed heavy on him, this decision. And like Carrie said, he really took the time to talk to a lot of people before he came to this conclusion, which was a surprise to all of us. But to Carrie's point, Democrats always like to say that Republicans are just a rubber stamp for the president. But Todd Blanche, man, went through the ringer here. It wasn't just, Cassidy. It was also Tom Tillis. It was John Cornyn. So you do see Republicans sort of pushing back on the president. And I wonder if we're going to see more of that in the future.
Well, actually, I think at least for the remainder of this Congress, you may, because the president, by primarying some of these folks or supporting their primary opponents, like he did with Bill Cassidy, has created sort of these free agents now that the White House has got to try to manage as they try to get these really important things and priorities for the president across the finish line. This whole thing gave me vibes, if you guys remember, of Susan Collins in the speech she gave back in 2018 about whether or not she was going to vote for Brett Kavanaugh to join the U.S. Supreme Court. It was 45 minutes long. There were many twists and turns. We weren't exactly sure where she was going. This was much more succinct, but felt very much the same way. Like it was a tough decision this senator was struggling with. He talked about the many times he met with Blanche. And I do think it was important to him that he said Blanche owns some things as mistakes, that anti-weaponization fund, the IRS immunity, some measure of it. He said that Blanche seemed to say to him, we made mistakes. I made mistakes there. But also saying that there are things that have been attributed to Blanche that were either out of his control or were not properly identified or explained publicly. So he was able to do a lot of clarification. So Blanche has had to really work for these votes. He's had to spend the time in person on phone calls, text, all of these things. But you're right, Aisha. I was surprised by that he seemed emotional at the end. Like he's really struggled with this decision. But ultimately, just as you got to the end of that speech from Susan Collins when she was a yes for Kavanaugh, at the end of the day, the supporters of this individual are just happy with however it was he got there.
Okay. Shannon, thanks to you. Just want to quote Bill Cassidy. This is not a referendum on President Trump. I worked hard to understand the issue and to make the right decision. And he laid that out for us. Back to Chad. Republicans had issues with Eric Holder and Merrick Garland under previous Democratic presidents. We know the president currently had problems with James Comey, but going back to the 1960s, JFK's brother was the Attorney General. I mentioned that John Thune told us yesterday that he's in the queue. So if you're in the queue, does it happen today or does this sit for a bit, as you said earlier?
Yeah, it probably has to happen today or tomorrow. Again, that procedural vote ripens today. So this is either going to happen later today if they get a time agreement or tomorrow. And going back to what Cassidy said here is that, he's somebody who had seen things through a different prism compared to President Trump, especially with the confirmation of RFK Jr. as the HHS secretary. Remember that Bill Cassidy is a doctor. He certainly tangled with him, expressed, some regrets in some cases about voting to confirm him, and willing to take it on the chin here to vote to confirm Bill Cassidy, to vote to confirm Todd Blanche, I should say. And what's important there, too, is that a lot of people thought that Bill Cassidy might hold a grudge and base this just on, the president working against him in his primary. You know, the same thing happened with John Cornyn. And both of these senators are going to vote yes. I think that's rather remarkable, where some people thought that, Bill Cassidy might be able to play this card and maybe kill this nomination as he goes out the door.
And Carrie, back over to you. Just wrap us up here with 30 seconds left on this anti-weaponization fund. That tended to be the problem for all of these senators. Okay.
I was more sympathetic than others were to the fund when it was initially announced, and that's just because working behind the scenes at DOJ, I watched the abuses firsthand that DOJ, when they weaponized it against various people. That said, I also understood the concerns about it. It was fraught, right, and it could be used for abuse in return. So I think Blanche handled this very well, worked with Cassidy on it, and here we are.
Okay.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you very
Shannon.
much.
Thank you, Chad. The big decisions in Washington, D.C. are razor thin. Have a
Happening
great
right now.
weekend, right? Here's
See ya.
Harris. Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.